Loading. All right, we are live. Hey everyone, welcome to today's live expert session with Lupus LA. We're so glad that you're here. Today we're talking about the connection between lupus and gut health, specifically microbial dysbiosis, loosely known as an imbalance in gut bacteria and other organisms. And some research hints that this imbalance may impact lupus symptoms. So we have Dr. V and Dr. Riley with us today to guide us through this topic. Dr. Swamy Venuturupalli is a leader in lupus care and a longtime member of Lupus LA's medical advisory board. Dr. Riley is a rheumatologist with a background in nutrition and clinical research. So they're here to help us unpack this today, what it means for lupus patients, and we'll have a Q&A at the end. I'll let you guys share a little bit more about you and your practice before we dive in.
Sure. Thank you so much, Brianna. Hopefully audio is coming through well.
Yep, sounds great.
Awesome. Hey, really happy to be here with my wonderful associate physician, Mark Riley, who joined our practice about a year and a half ago from Chicago, where he completed his training in rheumatology. And both Mark and I have been sharing a lot of lupus patients, myositis patients, autoimmune disease patients in general. And it's really exciting to see him grow as a rheumatologist. So excited to have this opportunity to share to the Lupus LA community, which is close to our heart at Attune Health, and share some of the exciting new things that we are learning as we learn more about the microbiome, its health effects, which are quite vast, as you all know. And I'm sure all of you are tuned here because there's something going on with the gut and you're curious as to what's happening, and we're here to break it down for you. And in preparation for this, Mark has prepared a small presentation, which should be about 5 to 10 minutes. And once that's done, we're here and would love to answer any questions that come up and share what we know about the microbiome, its dysbiosis, what effects that has on health in general, and specifically in the case of lupus, what this may portend for lupus. So without further ado, I'm going to have Mark Riley, excellent rheumatologist at Attune Health, here to walk us through this microbiome and gut dysbiosis and what it means for lupus.
Okay, all right. Thanks again for having us. We'll get started here. All right, Brianna, it's coming through.
Yep, looks great.
Okay, awesome. So let's talk about the gut microbiome and lupus today. So what right now our theories about how lupus develops is that we think there are multiple factors at play. Some of the ones that you can see here listed are we know that genetic susceptibility plays a major role in predisposing someone to autoimmune diseases and lupus. There are a variety of environmental triggers that we have identified that seem to be playing a role as well. And then exposure to pathogens too, and that can include bacterial infections, viruses. COVID-19 has been one over the last 5 or so years that has really gotten a lot of press and a lot more research. But we do know that the gut microbiome plays a role in other inflammatory diseases. And so there's some exciting research that we wanted to share with you about whether or not that may be an additional trigger for the development of lupus. And we should note that direct gastrointestinal manifestations of lupus are uncommon, but even despite that, we think there may be some connections in the pathogenesis of disease. So when we talk about the gut microbiome, what do we mean? So really what that means is that it refers to microbes that include bacteria, viruses, fungi that are kind of present all throughout the GI tract.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, Dr. Riley. I apologize. I think that we're not seeing the slides move through. I think we're seeing the main PowerPoint screen.
Oh.
I'm so sorry. I just wanted to make sure that we were catching up with you.
No, that's okay.
Let's see. So what does it say? Stop sharing. Yeah, I think it needs to play here.
Okay.
Okay. Does this work, Brianna?
Yeah, it does. We're seeing it in the full PowerPoint view. So if
Yeah.
you click on one of the second or third slides, I think we can just double check and make sure that we're caught up.
How's this?
Still looking at the first slide in the PowerPoint view.
Interesting. Okay. So it's not moving forward for some reason. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Hmm. So we're sharing our screen. Select Windows.
Yeah, it might be best to just go through the slides manually on the thumbnail side in PowerPoint versus view mode. That might help out.
Okay.
Versus the full screen, you mean?
Yeah,
How's
there we go. There we go.
And this
Yep, we're seeing the gut microbiome. We're caught up. Thanks so
perfect.
much.
Got it
Okay.
fixed.
Sorry,
So
everyone.
this is where we were. So,
Yes.
yeah, so going back to like really what we mean with the gut microbiome, the majority of that is bacteria. Um, we do know that various portions of the GI tract have different microbial populations. So, as an example, the mouth versus the small intestine and large intestine. And that's influenced by a number of different factors, including things that I've listed here, like mode of delivery at birth. So if you were delivered vaginally versus a C-section, but even as life goes on and as you develop into adulthood, that diet plays a major role, and medications, including antibiotics in particular, seem to also play a role in the makeup of the microbiome. All right, so we do know that in a healthy state that there is a very broad and diverse makeup of gut bacteria in the gut, and that it has these microbes have a variety of beneficial effects. So they help us protect from pathogenic bacteria and other organisms that can cause disease. But they also help us with digestion of the food that we eat, and also help to generate certain vitamins, in particular vitamin K, in the colon. So they have a lot of beneficial effects. And the majority of the bacteria that are in there are kind of broken down into four groups that I've listed here, including Bacteroides, Firmicutes, Proteobacteria, and Actinobacteria. And we do know that the loss of that diversity appears to be linked to the development of multiple inflammatory diseases. Most of the research has gone into inflammatory bowel disease, so that's Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, but there's also some growing body of research that suggests that there is a connection with obesity as well. So this is also kind of getting us well beyond just gut-specific diseases. So when we look at this from a microscopic standpoint, so on the top part of our screen, this is where the gut microbes kind of hang out, and that's sort of on the outer portion of the gut, which we call the lumen. And so that's there. Our gut is lined by a number of different cells. Most of them are these ones listed on the left side of the slide called enterocytes. And what they do is they help to absorb nutrients, but they also help to protect the inner portion of the body from harmful bacteria and harmful microbes that are within the gut lumen itself. And one of the ways that they do that is that they form these tight junctions, and so it creates a very definite barrier between that is very well maintained by the body in a healthy state. And the other thing that you see here on the bottom portion of the screen is that these cells that are called dendritic cells and macrophages reflect that the immune system, because these are cells as a part of the immune system that play a key role, and they are very closely tied to the gut. So anything that we are eating or any microbes that are in there are very closely interacting with that, and these immune cells are trying to help us decide whether or not we need to mount an immune response to it, or whether that we can sort of see that as self and to just kind of tolerate their presence and not cause inflammation. So the term gut dysbiosis, what do we mean by that? So, we've mentioned that there is sort of a normal bacterial balance of the number of different microbes that we have, but dysbiosis refers to really an imbalance of that, and really more that we, one, lose diversity of the amount of bacteria that we have and the types of bacteria, But there's also some overgrowth of more harmful bacterial species. And that seems to be implicated in a growing number of disorders, some of the ones that we listed here. And there's been some research that has looked into what's measuring a gut dysbiosis index. And so this may be sort of an early way that we can kind of help to identify folks who may have dysbiosis in the gut and whether or not that's playing a role in their current symptomatology. So what about, let's kind of move into lupus a little bit and what's been looked at in terms of lupus. So we do think that some of the preliminary research is showing that lupus patients seem to have a unique microbial signature. So we mentioned firmicutes as a group of bacteria that is one of the more beneficial bacteria in the gut. And those seem to be lower in studies that have looked in patients with lupus. And they've also found that there have been higher numbers of some of these more harmful species. Bacteroides is one that may have some both beneficial but also harmful effects. And then some of these other species like Ruminococcus, which I'll explain about in a little bit, and Enterococcus gallinarum as well. So with some of the preliminary research we have, there does appear to be evidence that patients with lupus do sort of have a unique microbial signature. So how might this actually be playing a role in lupus activity and disease? So this was one study that that we found from 2023 that looked at this particular bacteria called Ruminococcus navis. And what they found was that in patients who had active lupus, that increased growth of this particular bacteria seemed to be associated with increased disease activity. And even more interesting was that what are called blooms of these bacteria, which is just refers to the rapid growth expansion, was found in almost half of lupus nephritis patients who were flaring at the time. So kind of a very interesting
Wow.
combination of finding with growth expansion, but also disease activity in lupus. And we think that part of the reason that may be is that there is a certain molecule on the bacterial surface that seems to be what we call immunogenic and sort of turn on the immune system and act as an antigen that really drives the immune cascade.
Wow.
I will note that this was a small sample size for a study, but again, I think that these are while they're preliminary studies, I think that it serves as a very promising area of research, and I think that there is more active research that is going to continue to go on with this. Another study that was actually published in 2021 looked at doing fecal transplantation from mice that had been that were grown to sort of develop lupus, but also patients with active lupus. And what they did was they took stool samples from mice with active lupus, and they infused that into basically did a transplant into healthy mice. And what they found was that this actually led to generation of double-stranded DNA antibodies and type 1 interferon gene signatures, which is by the way that anifrolumab helps to treat lupus. So it actually does seem that that really seemed to generate sort of a lupus phenotype in otherwise healthy mice. And we know that this wasn't just a random happenstance, because when they did transplants from mice who did not have lupus, that this same phenomenon didn't occur. And again, they actually did the same thing with human patients with lupus. So they did fecal transplants there, and they were given to healthy mice, and the same process seemed to happen as well. So this really does seem to, again, suggest that there seems to be a connection between the gut and the development of lupus. So one of the ways that we think this may happen is that the gut barrier, while it is normally very tightly adherent and doesn't allow bacteria or signals to pass by, that we think that there may be some leakage of contents that's either happening, whether that's bacteria that are moving across and leading to this immune cascade and kind of turning on the immune system that you see in the bottom portion here. but also this concept of molecular mimicry, which is that signals that are from these bacteria can mimic signals on our own cells and sort of turn the immune system into itself, which is what seems to happen with autoimmunity and lupus.
Yeah. Coming back, if I may add a comment here. So the study on the Rheumacoccus navis, and I've had extensive conversations with Dr. Silverman as well as his fellows who worked on this project. And one of the really interesting findings was that this Rheumacoccus navis protein code actually mimics double-stranded DNA antibodies. So you're all
Whoa.
them as lupus patients, right? So imagine there's this bacteria and now you have a leaky gut, so it's showing up in the immune system, that bacteria, and it looks just like a double-stranded DNA. And so you start producing antibodies against that bacteria, which then cross-react with the kidney and cause nephritis. So that's the pathophysiology, and that's what we're thinking happens right now, and that's the state of the art. Obviously, this needs to be confirmed, and the
Hmm.
same group led by Dr. Silverman and his fellow Dr. Amarnani, they're actually putting in a grant right now to try and study this particular um, problem, and they've approached us to also partner with them and provide them with potentially samples and patients who are willing to participate in this sort of research. So it's super exciting. We're at the cutting edge of it. We're at the very beginning stages of trying to understand this, and it's more exciting things to learn and implement for our patients.
Definitely.
Mhm. All right. So this also kind of raises the question of what can we do about this, and how can we help you as patients to improve if this is an area where lupus is being generated and becoming active. So there are some preliminary thoughts about this, but some of this may include increasing fiber intake in your diet, which can act as a prebiotic for some of the healthy bacteria that are in the gut as well, to kind of allow them to regrow some of the colonies that have been lost during dysbiosis. Um, Limiting or avoiding things like processed food, especially excessively processed food, alcohol based, and then improving sleep. And then there's some preliminary thoughts that maybe certain supplements may help in terms of probiotics, L-glutamine, and vitamin D. That may be beneficial here, but there's still a lot of research that needs to go into this. But it's very exciting in terms of what we may be able to use as diet as a way to heal and kind of take a role in sort of a non-medication based approach, which is really exciting. All right, and then finally, just looking at some other future directions that may come up in terms of fecal transplant. So this is a therapy where you use healthy donor stool to treat disorders in the gut right now, and it's approved for a certain type of infectious colitis called C. difficile. There was one study that we found that was done in 2022 where they looked at patients with lupus, and it should be noted that those patients didn't have very severe lupus nephritis or central nervous system lupus, but what they found was that close to half of the patients actually did have a good response with this. Again, a smaller study, but I think the other benefit here was that there were relatively few adverse effects from this. So this again, I think, goes back to that this is actively being explored and studied in lupus, and I think we've got a lot more to come from this avenue, which is very exciting. All right, so just to kind of summarize what we talked about. So again, the gut microbiome does seem to play a role in lupus and the development of the disease and also flares of disease. A healthy gut generally has a diverse microbiome, and we think that loss of diversity leads to a variety of health issues, and that may include lupus and other inflammatory disorders. Lupus patients do seem to have a unique microbiotic signature. And Rheumacoccus navis, kind of like Dr. V had just mentioned, was that it seems to expand during active lupus and flares, in particular nephritis. Fecal transplants in mice and humans seem to lead to the generation of double-stranded DNA antibodies and a type 1 interferon signature. And we think that several therapies that may need to improve gut health may not just be related to medicines, but maybe more of a diet-based focus. And then some early preliminary results on fecal transplantation are promising, but again, we need some more studies to kind of confirm and determine if this really is truly a beneficial treatment for us. So, but we definitely know that the gut plays an important role in all aspects of health, and I think we're learning more and more about how it can really play a role in inflammatory diseases like lupus. All right. And so this is our group at Attune Health. It is led by our fearless leader here, but this is our group, and we're happy to take any questions that you have. Thanks for your time. Greatly appreciate it.
Awesome. That was so cool. Thank you so much. We do have questions. It's just really exciting to hear about the things that are being trialed and the different ways that something like this could be approached. I know that, most people aren't hearing a lot about fecal transplant and the different ways that these these different studies and trials might be able to affect patients in the future. So it's just really exciting to hear that that's going on. I'm going to jump into some of the questions that we have. Someone said, I heard that probiotics can be both good and bad if you have autoimmune disease. Do probiotics help with dysbiosis and lupus, or can they make things worse?
Yeah, I can take that. So probiotics are a mixed, I guess, a double-edged sword. So first of all, in certain circumstances, in my experience, and
Hmm.
the official party line for most doctors and gastroenterologists that I come across is going to be, yes, they're potentially harmful. There's no proven benefit, so stay away from them. But when you dig a little bit deeper into the studies and what my understanding of it is, and I'm going to share my opinion here, not the evidence. My opinion is that
Sure.
we don't quite know what is the right probiotic for each patient. We're only scratching the surface in terms of our understanding of the exact composition of the gut microbiome is. And there are certain companies that provide methods. They do stool testing, and they'll give you a full spectrum of over 100 or 200 different bacterial species that they track, which are the most important bacteria in somebody's gut. And from a careful analysis of that sort of data, you can see where there are certain deficiencies. Now, based on that, we can make some guesses as to which particular probiotics may be beneficial.
Hmm.
But there are a few caveats that I want to emphasize. One of
Okay.
them is that probiotics are not a cure for long-term cure for gut dysbiosis. So gut dysbiosis happens over decades of a patient's life, and just taking a probiotic doesn't really work to fix that.
Hmm.
Probiotics are notorious for their very short duration of action.
Oh.
So if you take probiotics, you're not really changing the gut microbiome in a big way. For that, you need fecal transplants. Fecal transplants are much higher concentration. They're given repeatedly. They're given directly into the colon sometimes as capsules, sometimes both. And that science is also developing. And even in those patients with fecal transplants, the stickiness of the new bacteria is still not fully established, and the exact
Mm.
protocol of how to, get a long-term change in the microbiome is still being worked out.
Interesting.
So, yeah, so probiotics, I think, can potentially be good. They can potentially worsen abdominal symptoms, like abdominal pain, may worsen constipation in some cases. Certain probiotics are better in that situation, like lactobacillus may be better if you're trying to treat constipation.
Mm.
Um, and so this is an evolving science still, and I think in general, as doctors, we try not to cause too much harm.
Hmm.
We're more conservative typically in recommendations, and I think that's kind of what you're hearing when you hear doctors say, yeah, they could be harmful, or yeah, they don't, we're not sure they work. And all of that taken, in this context, those statements do have some validity.
Okay.
But I think the nuance about it is that they can potentially be helpful, at least in the short term, at least temporarily.
Yeah. It seems like the takeaway here for patients is that lifestyle factors that help grow a positive microbiome and make your terrain more positive is a little bit more conservative than going at it on your
Yeah,
own with selecting.
I think that's fair. And the other piece of information I would add to that is that to change a microbiome, you have to plan to do it over a long period of time. And you have to understand that certain foods are they are helpful in cultivating a good microbiome. So particularly those high fiber foods that Dr. Riley talked about. Fiber is really great for the microbiome because fiber, especially the long-acting carbohydrates, they go all the way down to the colon
Hmm.
without getting metabolized. So they actually show up in the colon, which is where most of the gut microbiome lives, and that allows them to be utilized by the microbiome to then hopefully grow a healthier culture of microbiome in your colon. So
Okay,
I think that's really helpful. And I think diet is probably more powerful an intervention than just taking probiotics and fixing the microbiome.
sure. That makes sense. That definitely makes sense. Thank you for that. Someone else asked, does long-term steroid use or immunosuppressant use mess up your gut microbiome?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great question, and I think the answer is that it can. I don't think we have enough data on that yet to say
Sure.
definitively. But when we talk about medicines that are suppressing the immune system, they one of the ways that they act is that they tend to go after cells that are rapidly producing and are rapidly growing. So our immune system
Okay.
cells are always growing, and the same can be said for the gut and the skin. So those are cells where there's a lot of what we call cell turnover, and certain medications can affect that. So the answer is yes, potentially they can.
Yeah.
I think the question of whether or not you need to stay away from medications for the sake of protecting the gut alone is a very person specific.
Yes. Speaking to your doctor for sure.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it can.
And some of the things to remember with corticosteroids is that they can increase the blood sugar, which then promotes certain types of bacteria to grow more. And then the other thing about steroids is that they do promote the growth of fungi and yeast. So that's another thing that can take over a bacterial milieu and affect it adversely. In this context, I did want to share some really exciting research that's being done in this field.
Sure.
First of all, Mark Pimentel, who's here at Cedar, is a good friend, colleague of mine.
Hmm.
Um, he has shown in his cohort where he has a lot of patients that he gets these small bowel aspirates on and also gets
Sure.
stool samples. He's shown that medications, even for short period of time, any of our immune modulating, immune suppressive therapies can affect the microbiome. So, for example, I was designing a study with him and in rheumatoid arthritis and the microbiome,
Oh,
and
wow.
he showed me this data where I was arguing for the fact that hey, we should include patients who are on methotrexate because that's kind of the starter drug. I'm not going to be able to tell my patient first day that I diagnose them, hey, I want you to join Mark Pimentel's in my study for doing
Right.
a small bowel aspirate without actually offering them any treatment. And he convinced me saying, nah, if you give them methotrexate, you're going to really change their microbiome. He showed me the data, which was really compelling.
Wow.
And I'll tell you another story in that same context. Sorry, I might cut me short if I'm going
No,
too long.
this is really fascinating.
Another study done by one of our rheumatology colleagues up at UCSF, Dr. Shinoy, she presented this really amazing data whereby methotrexate is she's trying to figure out the mechanism of action of methotrexate in rheumatoid arthritis. And what she has shown is that she can predict who's a responder to methotrexate based on the changes in the microbiome that
That
occur.
is wild.
So to answer your question, based on not not 100% convincing foolproof science, but I'm looking at it and saying, yeah, absolutely, these
Maybe
drugs
something there.
have an effect on your microbiome. Is that the primary way that they work? That's still not established science. We're working on it. We're trying to do the studies and we will get those answers.
Hmm.
But my hunch is, yeah, I think it plays a role.
This is so interesting. I feel like we're getting more Pimentel Lab news through you right now than the lab.
Well,
Um,
I'm also speculating, so please take it with a grain of salt. And I don't have the
understood.
have any funding on the line or something where I have to be very cautious about what I say.
No, no worries. It's very interesting and helpful to hear kind of about what's being talked about, the different areas being explored. I know for some patients listening that they might not really be familiar with thinking about dysbiosis. They might not be have a gastroenterologist. If they were going to have a conversation with their rheumatologist about this, what are some of the signs or things they might notice about having dysbiosis or symptoms that might be worth talking about with their doctor to see if gut health is an area to explore just in general?
Yeah, I think great question.
Yeah, I think some of the questions that I try to ask, and I think this is something that I've really learned from you, is just about one, getting a sense of what someone's diet is like in terms of a long-term standpoint, which I think which can sometimes be a tough question of it's not as simple as, oh, what kind of things are you eating, and just from like a short-term basis. So that can be one thing, but other symptoms that we sometimes see can be either like chronic abdominal pain, sometimes bloating that can be very frequent,
Okay.
sometimes excess gas, alternating bowel habits. So a lot of these actually do have, like some of the symptoms that I just listed are also have a lot of overlap with a condition called irritable bowel syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
So there seems to be a lot of
Sure.
overlap with that,
Yeah.
but these can be sort of early signs that that there may be something going on in the gut
Yeah,
too.
some of the other things we ask patients is the stool consistency and volume, like how frequently are you going? Are the stools
Mm-hmm.
broken up? Are they, fully formed logs? That's a sign of a healthy microbiome that's working well, in my opinion, and the transit times are perfect. But sometimes you have fast transit because of which the stool doesn't get fully formed, or you may have very slow transit whereby the stool is so hardened that you get very constipated. So those are also signs. Bloating, some irritability with certain foods. Certain foods are known to provoke GI symptoms in our patients, and that's always a concern, that there might be something going on with the gut. So, I mean, I think, practically speaking, a lot of rheumatologists don't focus necessarily on the gut health. And even gastroenterologists, to be very honest, they will, have a pretty generic explanation for this. And to be, very clear here, what we are presenting is really the cutting edge of where we are scientifically and trying to understand these concepts. So,
Yes, absolutely.
and just say, hey, I think I have dysbiosis, and Dr. Ventrapalli and Riley told us that, this affects my lupus, fix it. It's not going to work that way. You know that.
Right.
You
Absolutely.
have,
I know. I think it's a challenge. Obviously, we have a community that's across the entire country, and not everybody going to their, local physician is always going to get answers or have longer conversations. And often patients don't have time. Like the doctors are moving so quickly, there isn't that time to sit there and have a conversation that's even speculative or preventative or even just for education. So we're so grateful for your time to talk about this because there are so many exciting things happening. And like, even the Rhuminococcus navis conversation is just so fascinating that that's being looked at and the way that drugs are processed through the microbiome. I mean, this is really incredible. I wish that all lupus patients could kind of be aware of all the exciting things going on. And so having you on here today means a lot to us. Thank you so much for this.
sure, absolutely.
I think your point, Dr. Riley, just as we're wrapping up talking about kind of the symptoms and whatnot, I know a lot of patients obviously struggle with severe brain fog. in lupus. But if you're having digestive issues or you're having some of the symptoms that they talked about, it's possible that some brain fog also might be caused by something related to dysbiosis or GI issues like that. So I think it's, just worth keeping in mind.
Yeah, I think that brings up some interesting points. I think that when you think about it conceptually and like what is happening, why do our patients with GI issues also have brain fog? I think a few things to think about.
Okay.
One concept that we did not touch in this talk is something called postbiotics. So so we know what probiotics are, right? So
Sure.
probiotics are bacteria that we put into our gut and hope for the best. Prebiotics are actually foods that are poorly digested in the small intestine and stomach, and they end up reaching the colon and actually form food for the colonic bacteria. Postbiotics are the products produced by your microbiome. And we're finding more and more that these are critical for health. So, for example, so we all are familiar with serotonin, which,
Yes.
it's a neurotransmitter. Serotonin deficiency is associated with depression, some cases anxiety. And we find that the gut bacteria is the primary source. It produces more serotonin in the body than anywhere else. So so you're producing all this chemicals, neurochemicals. Clearly, serotonin has a huge impact on
Definitely.
your brain function. So I think we're just scratching the surface with some of these concepts. But yeah, brain fog due to the postbiotics is one thing. The other thing that we did not touch upon in this presentation, and I think it's maybe a little too deep, but I want to introduce that concept
Sure.
to your community is that there's a cell type called mast cell. Mast
Yes.
cells are parts of the immune system, and they also live in the gut and other mucosal surfaces, and they produce a lot of chemicals in response to what they sense as danger. So, for example, if you have an irritated gut lining, which is leaking bacteria and food antigens into the intestinal wall where they're now meeting the immune system. The mast cells are the first line of defense. They see these pathogens that have gone through that leaking gut membrane and they
Okay.
start degranulating or blowing up and releasing. So far, we know that
Inflammatory chemicals.
boundary chemicals. So far, we know at least 180 chemicals that can be released by mast cells, and we can test about 4 or 5 of them. So that I think also is playing a role, and it might be playing a role not just in brain fog, but also in other symptoms like itching, rashes, um, edema of the skin,
An aggravating autoimmune disease, right? With
many
antibodies.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So those are concepts to think about as we think through brain fog.
Yeah, so fascinating. Just for everyone listening, if you're not familiar with leaky gut, or this is a little sciencey for your taste, we have a really awesome live expert session we've done with Dr. Venuturupalli in the past on leaky gut. So I'll link that in the comments so that you can take a look at that and learn a little bit more about what it means for things to pass through the gut barrier and your immune system to potentially respond, cause inflammation, other things that can downstream sort of affect any underlying picture that you have going on. If that's not something you're familiar with, we definitely would recommend checking that out. Thank you both so much. We really appreciate your time today. If anyone is interested in learning more about you, we will link to your practice, which is Attune Health, in the comments so that they can learn a little bit more about what you have going on out here on the West Coast.
Fabulous.
Awesome.
Thank you for the invite and good luck to everyone.
Yeah, thanks for your time.